came into earshot, as did a horn that Stepney seemed to recognise.
Oh dear, hold on to your hats, 'cause it's bold. Whoa.
Stepney stopped when the diesel stopped beside him. He remembered the diesel to be shiny and well polished, but what stood before him couldn't have been the same diesel. He was grimy, filthy, and had some rust around his buffers and body.
I've talked in the past about how Thomas works with horror and the more scary themes, but how exactly does it work with sad and sorrowful themes? Well, let's explore a bit, shall we? And we're going to start with the Awdry books. Reverend Wilbert Awdry's books had no issue diving into depressing moments, especially in this universe. Some of the illustrations, too, showing the absolutely depressing atmosphere of the scrapyard. I think this particular image is enough to spell out what that feeling is like for a locomotive that's unfortunately been withdrawn from service. Because Awdry's books were filled with life lessons, especially about growing up, it's actually kind of surprising that he never wrote anything about coping with loss. We only got small bits and pieces where it's acknowledged, such as Gordon briefly mentioning,
"Thinking about the dreadful state of the world, sir. Is it true, sir, what the diesels say?" "What do they say?" "They boast that they've abolished steam, sir." "Yes, Gordon, it is true." "What, sir? All my Doncaster brothers drawn the same time as me? All gone, except one."
We never really got an Awdry book focused mainly on scrap itself. It's usually just utilized as just a plot point, such as like the story of Stepney being rescued by Rusty the Diesel, or Oliver being rescued by Douglas from the same fate. The thing is, we never got a story completely focused on losing someone. And the model series, I might even add, even though it could play with tone really well and freak us the fuck out with its music and visuals, it never pushed that line of, we have a character that's going to be loved, and then it's going to be taken away. And it's up to the audience and the rest of the engines of Sodor to deal with that loss and cope with it. Let's talk about the model series a bit. Because the model series, while it's really good with playing with tone and getting into some scarier aspects, it really kind of didn't exercise that enough with other themes as well. They kind of softened the imagery of scrap a bit more. I mean, there's a couple of shots from different episodes where the engines are just working amongst a bunch of corpses of other engines that are long since forgotten. Especially this one shot here. I think it's strange that Percy has a smiling expression on his face. I know it's probably a production thing where they said, oh, his face is not going to be in focus on the camera, no one's going to be able to see it, but we can still tell that Percy's smiling. Percy is a sick bastard, everyone. Jokes. This is where fan adaptations come into the picture. If I had to place some particular fan adaptations that really connect with the series it's based off of, I would say adaptations like Goodbye, Mrs. Kindley and Cruel Irony work the best. Let's start with Goodbye, Mrs. Kindley. Mrs. Kindley has been such a major supporting character and a beloved one throughout the Railway series and the Model series and the TV show. However, this adaptation in particular acknowledges the fact that she's an elderly woman and she won't be around forever.
She's getting old, Thomas sighed. I do wish there was a way we could make things easier for her.
What if we make deliveries? I can ask the foreman to load anything she needs into my vans,
Percy said cheerfully. And I can bring her friends to visit her in Henrietta, Toby added. That's settled then, Thomas smiled. If we all pitch in wherever we can make a big difference for Mrs. Kindley. The engines were as good as their word, making a special stop each day at Mrs. Kindley's cottage to bring much-needed food and fellowship. Thomas's driver and firemen helped her plant her new flowers, and neighbors helped clean the cottage from top to bottom. Soon it looked better than ever before, and Mrs. Kindley thanked the engines, their drivers, and all of her friends for their hard work. It makes an old woman smile to have such wonderful...
When it does get to that final act and Toby learns of her passing, as well as the rest of the audience, it's presented in a way to how we cope with loss. Remembering the person and everything great about them, and looking towards an optimistic future.
Up and saw the blooms. Vibrant reds, blues, and yellows sparkled in the sunshine. They're beautiful, but can never replace what came before, Toby said to himself, thinking of his friend Mrs. Kindley. But no matter how sad he felt, the new life blossoming at the cottage reminded him that Mrs. Kindley was still there. Goodbye, Mrs. Kindley.
In Cruel Irony's case, it's just straight up melancholic by the end of it. It plays with the reality that, yeah, steam and diesel can both be destined for the fate of scrapped, and how much the island of Sodor is like a safe haven for both. The writer Mayfwader chose the perfect characters for this story as well. Stepney, who was on the verge of being scrapped only to be rescued by Rusty, and D261, an arrogant modern diesel who was rude and conceited when he first came to the island. Only years later does he find out the harsh truth that even engines like him aren't safe from the scrapyard and are being withdrawn from service.
I apologize for my behavior all those years ago, Stepney. I was young and entitled. I didn't realize how lucky I was to be on Sir Topham Hatt's railway, and I squandered my chance to be a part of his fleet. I understand now how you must have felt on the other railway, and now there's a cold, dark siding waiting for me too.
Now, some of you might be thinking maybe there's a reason that the show couldn't do it, because it's too heartbreaking. And that's where I'd say other shows that are really aimed at kids did it already. I'll give you a good example. Sesame Street. Yeah, Sesame Street. So there was this character on the show called Mr. Hooper, who owned a store along the street there. The actor playing him, Will Lee, passed away in 1982. The show's writers and creators had to think of a way that kids would understand death, seeing as how he was a very beloved character and his disappearance definitely wouldn't go unnoticed. And they wrote the episode through the best character that relates to the age range that usually watches this TV program, and that was Big Bird. Big Bird is represented like a 5-year-old child, so adults trying to explain to a child what death is and how people don't come back from it is certainly a really mature way of going about this. And they did it the best way they could.
We told you Mr. Hooper died. He's dead.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Well, I'll give it to him when he comes back.
Big Bird, when people die, they don't come back.
Ever?
Well, Big Bird, they're dead. They can't come back.
You're right, Big Bird. It'll never be the same around here without him. But you know something? We can all be very happy that we had a chance to be with him and to know him and to love him a lot when he was here.
Yeah.
If Sesame Street can do that, there's no boundaries telling the makers of Thomas that they can't do that. Unless some executive is like, well, can't we just make it ADHD-induced happiness and colorful?
You jackass!
But when we get these saddening and heartbreaking stories from fans of Thomas, it never seems far-fetched from its basis. It works, and it works really well. The writers and directors of these adaptations are bringing together a new workable concept into Thomas. And as fans, we humbly accept it like it was always there to begin with.